Powered by Riverside FM.
Powered by Riverside.
Welcome to Unconventional Playbook, the UP. Hit that like and subscribe button. Sorry we're not here under better circumstances. The Minnesota Timberwolves did not get the job done tonight, losing to the Dallas Mavericks, 124-103. First off, let's just get this out of the way. The Minnesota Timberwolves had a fantastic season. Just a tremendous season. Hats off to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Unbelievable season. Like, I think if you would have told me at the beginning of the year that the Minnesota Timberwolves will make it to the Western Conference Finals, I would not have believed you. If you would have told me that the Minnesota Timberwolves would take out the defending, reigning champions, the Denver Nuggets, I would not believe you. So the Minnesota Timberwolves deserve nothing but applause. Where they have taken this franchise over the last couple of years, first getting a taste of it when they brought in Patrick Beverley a couple of years ago, winning the play-in game, and everybody criticized them because they celebrated getting into that game like it was the playoffs. And, Patrick Beverley standing up at midcourt, waving the towel, cheering with the fans. They took a lot of criticism for that. But, with a franchise that had really, really never, ever been there, for them to have that moment was great. But this year really surpasses that, being one of the best teams in the league for the majority of the year in terms of record. Coming into the playoffs, sweeping the Phoenix Suns with KD, then winning a Game 7 at Denver against the Denver Nuggets. The Minnesota Timberwolves have nothing to hang their heads about. Tremendous, fantastic year. Chris Finch and his staff deserves all the accolades that they get. Just a fantastic job in building this team. With that being said, doesn't mean we can't critique them. Doesn't mean that as fans, we can't want for more. See, that's the trap that you get in. It's like, it's one thing to just focus on the negative, but it's another thing to just focus on the positive. I think there's room for some middle ground. I think there's room for some critiquing. So this show is going to be about the truth. And we're going to talk about the truth about the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is not going to be negative, and it's not too soon. For those of you that are Timberwolves sensitive, this might not be the show for you. This might not be the show for you. If you want to hear a lot of duckies and bunnies and roses and candy canes and stuff like that, this is not the show for you. We may throw some of that stuff out there. But this is about the truth. This is about the truth of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And you know what they say? The truth will set you free. And the truth will also make you better as a franchise if you recognize what the truths are. So I'm just going to go through some things in which I think are truths about the Minnesota Timberwolves. You may agree. You may disagree. Put them in the comments. Send me an email, whatever you want to do. I love reading that kind of stuff. First truth, Anthony Edwards is a budding star. We haven't had a player like Anthony Edwards around here in a long time. I mean, we've had some good players in terms of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the franchise, and I can't name them all, but the guy that started it off, Pooh Richardson, you had J.R. Ryder, obviously Kevin Garnett, Kevin Love, Stephon Marbury, Tommy Gugliotta, Christian Laettner. I mean, we've had just a lot of good players with the Minnesota Timberwolves. But very rarely do you find special talent like Kevin Garnett. To use the word good would be an understatement. Kevin Garnett was great. He's a Hall of Famer. He was that special player. And I'm not ready to put Anthony Edwards up there with a KG, but I am ready to put him up there that he's a budding superstar at 22 years of age, where he's taken this franchise. He deserves to be really commended for that. Think about where you were at 22 years of age, and to see him take that on and get the Minnesota Timberwolves where he got them to this year. He was a big part of that. Obviously, it's a team sport. You could throw Cat in there. You could throw Rudy Gobert in there. You could throw Mike Conley in there, whoever. It wasn't just Anthony Edwards by himself, but he carried the majority of the weight this year. So that's the truth about him. He is a budding superstar. And I think that anybody that says differently is just hating on him or maybe just disappointed about the loss. But today we're dealing in truths. And the truth is that Anthony Edwards is a budding superstar. There's no way you can disagree with that. I'm not putting him on the same level as a Kobe and Michael Jordan like some do, but I am ready to put him in a category that I think he's only going to get better, and that by the end of this thing, he's going to be a Hall of Famer, and he is a budding superstar right now. You just can't argue that. Number two, another truth. The Minnesota Timberwolves had a great season. Like, I know this stings and it hurts because it didn't end well. And you got your hopes high when the Minnesota Timberwolves beat the Denver Nuggets and Jokic, the defending champs. I mean, they won that game in Denver. And then they got you ready for the next series. And they just didn't show up this series like I thought they would. I said at the beginning of this series that they would win in 6. And boy, was I wrong. I just expected a different team to show up. What I did tell you on the last pod, I said the Minnesota Timberwolves would win game 4 in Dallas. And I said they would come home and lose game 5. Biggest setup on the planet. This is who this team has been. They have not been a good playoff team at home. So the Minnesota Timberwolves can't take away from their season. No matter how disappointed you are, they had a fantastic season. Nobody would have expected this season. This is a truth. They had a fantastic season. And as Minnesota Timberwolves fans, you should be really, really proud of your team. Another truth about the Minnesota Timberwolves organization. Minneapolis and Minnesota, they've got great fans. I mean, you saw the class of the Minnesota fans after this game. Even though they were disappointed, they had nothing to cheer about tonight. They got shelled. The game was a 20 to 30 point game, pretty much the whole game. At the end of the game, as the Timberwolves were walking off the floor, you heard, "Let's go Wolves. Let's go Wolves." The Minnesota fans, it's why I get so angry with our teams here in town. Because I think somewhat they take the fans for granted. Our fans are loyal. They come out in droves. You saw the block parties. You saw the energy in the arena tonight. You see it in the stadium with the Minnesota Vikings. Our fans deserve something great to happen to them because no matter what, they're going to stay there loyal. Minnesota fans are some of the greatest fans in the country. You saw that tonight. That's the truth. Minnesota Timberwolves have great fans. This is a truth. I felt like. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves coaching staff got outcoached this series. And sometimes when you have the burden of being a coach like myself, you can't really enjoy basketball games anymore. All you see is X's and O's and what adjustments I would make if I were out there. You think about how certain adjustments could help the team. And I just didn't see those from the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm not saying they didn't. Sometimes, you work on things, and once the lights get bright, your players don't respond or don't do the things that you work on in practice. So there could have been a little bit of that, but just certain adjustments I didn't see the Minnesota Timberwolves make. You got to find a way to get Ant open and have him score. I thought one adjustment they could have made is just not letting him bring the ball up so much. They tried a little bit of that, but then they went right back to having him bring the ball up a little bit more. Just personnel decisions on who should play the majority of the minutes in the game. I didn't see a whole lot of adjustments there. And I just think Jason Kidd did a fantastic job. I mean, arguably, they came in and scored just a tremendous amount of points pretty much every game against the number one ranked defensive team in the league. And I think a lot of that had to do with Jason Kidd just being a point guard, understanding the game. People forget Jason Kidd played at Cal Berkeley. And you know anything about Cal Berkeley, you need to be pretty head smart to be able to get into that school. Not only that, he excelled at the college level as a player, excelled at the pro level as a player. Now he's a coach, and he's excelling as a coach. Just made some great adjustments in terms of the Dallas Mavericks. They held down our scores pretty much the whole series. And again, he went up against the supposed number one defensive team in the league. And honestly, they made that stuff look easy for 5 games in terms of scoring. And I just think hats off to the Dallas Mavericks. Not saying that our coaching staff is deficient. It's not what I'm saying. Again, we're dealing with truths. And so we're taking some of the sensitivity off of it, and they got outcoached. See, I love my position because I don't have any relationships with the coaches or the players or anything. So I can tell the truth. I don't have to sugarcoat it. Anything that I'm saying tonight is going to be about truth and what we saw. If I had a Minnesota Timberwolves personnel player in this room right now doing this podcast with me, they couldn't argue the point that the Dallas Mavericks coaching staff did a fantastic job. And they beat them at every turn. And they couldn't make adjustments to what Dallas was doing. And Dallas really, really excelled with that. So I thought the Minnesota Timberwolves coaching staff just got outcoached this series. I've been outcoached many a times coaching basketball. Sometimes it happens. So you got to go back to the drawing board and make sure that stuff doesn't happen again. This is the truth. Minnesota Timberwolves need to trade Rudy Gobert. And it's not too early. This is not an emotional take. This is not a hate take on Rudy Gobert. I think Rudy Gobert is really serviceable. But I'm going to take the same stance with Rudy Gobert as I took with Kirk Cousins for the Minnesota Vikings. If you're going to make that amount of money and you're going to trade all of these assets for Rudy Gobert, there's got to be a certain level of production when it counts. He was criticized for not showing up in the playoffs when he played for the Utah Jazz. And we've been getting a little taste since he joined this team of Rudy Gobert in playoff situations. And it hasn't been good, guys. It just hasn't been good. He has been stellar in the regular season. But what are you going to do next year? You're going to bring Rudy Gobert back, right? And he's going to put up great numbers and great stats in the regular season. But in the back of your mind, you know what he looks like in the playoffs. So my question becomes, because I feel like this is a truth that he needs to get traded, what are you going to do? Are you going to hang your hat on Rudy Gobert again? A post player that has trouble scoring in the playoffs? And I'm not saying that he hangs his hat on offense because he's never been a super productive offensive player. But what does he hang his hat on? He hangs his hat on defense. Are you getting enough production there when it counts? The defensive player of the year, are you getting enough production there? Can you look at the body of work that he gave us for these playoffs, the 3 series? And as a fan, and I would even go as far as to say a coach or an executive in the front office, are you happy with what you're getting from Rudy Gobert when it counts. See, everybody wants to trade Karl Anthony Towns. Karl Anthony Towns, I don't think is a problem because he's showing you, as I said before in many of my pods, who he is. He's an up and down, high volume shooter, high volume scorer. No one ever said that Karl Anthony Towns was going to be a great player. Everyone tells me that Rudy Gobert is a great defensive player. Did you see that during any of the series this year? He's your only tradable asset, he and Cat. And again, I'm not ready to get rid of Cat just yet because you're not going to get a return on his value. I think you can get a return on the value of Rudy Gobert. So in terms of trades, that's what I do. Because he didn't protect the rim. They were pretty much a sieve the whole series on defense. And then when you look at his whole body of work, Rudy Gobert, for this playoff season, as a fan and my expectation, man, I'm just not happy with it. Another truth. Again, these are not hate takes. These are truth. Doesn't mean I dislike the players or hate the player. I'm just telling the truth. Anthony Edwards can't carry this team. It's the truth. It's the truth. If you watch the playoffs, and especially this series, he gets stifled when he has a whole bunch of bodies in front of him. And Anthony Edwards is very comfortable. And this is a part about coaching that I see when I'm watching these games. I have the mind of a coach on the sidelines all the time. I'm not a fan. Like I watch these games intellectually as a coach. See what they're running, see what defenses they're playing, see what adjustments they're playing. I see body language. Anthony Edwards, again, is very comfortable taking a backseat. He is very comfortable taking a backseat. It is, and again, I'm not comparing him to LeBron James. LeBron James is one of the greats. I'm comfortable with LeBron James being in the top three. I think LeBron James, Kobe, Michael Jordan are three of the greatest players that I've ever seen play NBA basketball. But it's the one thing that keeps LeBron James from being where Michael Jordan is. LeBron James is very comfortable deferring the basketball. And I'm not saying that the game shouldn't be played that way. I'm just saying when you give it the eye test, and you look at those big moments, players that are comfortable deferring to other players, they're not going to be as great as they can be. There's going to be times and moments where they're just not going to show up because they have that mindset. When you think about the game in Cleveland, when LeBron led us to the championship for the first time, who hit the big shot in that game? Kyrie Irving did. Because LeBron deferred to Kyrie. Anthony Edwards is very comfortable deferring. If I had to pick out one part of his game, and again, he's 22 years old, he may mature into something that is absolutely extraordinary. But I'm saying right now, he is not at a point where he can carry his team. He doesn't have the mindset. He's not a killer like that. He's very comfortable deferring the basketball. That's what I see in his body language. That's what I see in his body of work. You know, he loves shooting the three ball, doesn't like to split the gaps and always get to the basket. He relies a lot on his three-point shot. And he is very comfortable with deferring. That's not a hate take. That is what I saw over his body of work for these playoffs. He's okay with that. And to be as great as he can be, I just don't think my message to him would be, you can't be okay in those type of moments with deferring the basketball to everybody else when you know that you've got to carry the load. It's true. It's just truth. Here's another truth. Minnesota Timberwolves need a tough guy. They need a tough guy on this team. They got a lot of, really good players, players that hustle and play hard. They need, think about all of the great teams. Look at the Dallas Mavericks. Like, everybody called Luka a crybaby. Luka just walked into Minnesota and said, "Here, take this," and then talked stuff to Snoop Dogg, who was sitting on the baseline. Like, that's Luka. Like, he's their tough guy. People criticize Draymond Green, and I am not a Draymond Green's fan. I'm not a Draymond Green fan. But how many times did the Golden State the Golden State Warriors need Draymond? In their championship runs, Clay is not the tough guy. Andrew Wiggins is not the tough guy. Steph Curry is not the tough guy. They needed Draymond. That's why when he gets kicked out of games or he's suspended from games, it hurts them so much. He's the tough guy on that team, where if someone on the other team is getting off, you just say, "Hey, Dre, can you handle this?" And Draymond Green will handle it. Back in the day, the great Bulls team, who was the tough guy? Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman. You need that tough guy. You need that dog. And obviously, they need somebody else to go with Anthony Edwards in terms of scoring. I don't think that's going to be your tough guy. The Minnesota Timberwolves got to go out and find themselves an enforcer from somewhere, because there ain't, excuse my grammar, but there ain't an enforcer on the Minnesota Timberwolves roster. That is a truth. Here's another truth. Minnesota Timberwolves needs another scorer. Like, it's apparent. You can't count on anybody on the Minnesota Timberwolves team to give you 15. I'm not talking about 20. The only guy outside of Anthony Edwards that you can rely on to give you 15 is nobody. Sit back and think about this. If you had to pick a player on the team that you knew for sure was going to give you 15 points every time you jump the ball up and play, who would that be on the Minnesota Timberwolves? I'll wait. Who would that be? They need to get another score. They need to get another score. Ant can't carry the load. He's not mentally ready for that yet. He's 22 years old. The Minnesota Timberwolves need to go out, find themselves another score. That's paramount. Need tough guy, need a score. That's who they need. Another truth, home court advantage means nothing. I've always been the type of coach where I always laugh, because whenever you talk about two teams facing up, they always say, well, they're playing at home. They're going to have home court advantage. And I've always been taught as an athlete and as a coach that weak teams buy into that there's something magical about a building or a floor that is going to help you win games no matter how bad you play. How come when you talk about great players, home court advantage doesn't apply? You think home court advantage applied to Luka Doncic this series? He won 3 games in Minnesota and closed them out in the Target Center. You think Michael Jordan? How many games did Michael Jordan win on the road? There's no home court advantage there. He just walked into your building and did you. There's no home court advantage there. Look at Jokic. Walked into the Target Center, did the Minnesota Timberwolves. No home court advantage there. And then they had Game 7 on their floor, and then they lost that to the Minnesota Timberwolves. What is home court advantage? You'll hear it again next year. Oh, well, this team is fighting for home court advantage. Doesn't mean nothing to great teams and dogs. They don't care where they play. Let's lace them up. Let's play. That's the way dogs think. Playing at home and you think you got some sort of advantage. This is not a video game where you play video games and you have the home court advantage and they sway the way things turn out because you're at home on a video game. No, this is realistic. Home court advantage means nothing. It's a crutch for soft teams. You should be able to win anywhere. Go on the road and win anywhere. Look at the great teams. Look at what Boston just did. They're in the NBA Finals. They walked into Indiana, who hadn't lost a home game since March, and closed them out. Great teams don't care about home court advantage. Here's another truth. Minnesota Timberwolves are not the number one defensive team in the league. I know you don't want to hear it. I know you think that's a hate take. I know you don't want to hear it, but they're not the number one defense. If you can't produce that when it counts, that is a flawed stat. That is a flawed stat. If you can't be the number one defensive team when it counts, you're fraudulent. You're fraudulent. Did we see the number one defensive team at all during the Dallas Mavericks series? No. You saw it here and there against Utah. Oh my gosh, game two, not Utah, but Denver. Game 2 in Denver. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's one of the best defensive games I've ever seen. They couldn't produce that again. Truth is they're a good defensive team. They're not the number one defensive team in the league. You might not want to hear it, but it's the truth. Another truth, Rudy Gobert is not the defensive player of the year. Statistically, he may have put up great defensive stats during the regular season this year. Both things can be true at the same time. That statistically, he gave you some really good defensive stats. If you can't put Rudy Gobert on any post in the league and count on him to slow them down, how can he be the defensive player of the year? I will wait. He's not. It's the truth. It's not a hate take. It's not I know it feels like I'm being pretty harsh on Rudy. Trade him. He's not the defensive player of the year. But man, it is the truth. And unless you have blinders on and you're just a blind Minnesota Timberwolves fan, you're never going to get better. If you can't tell the truth, you're never going to get better. Because what you're going to have is a replay of Rudy Gobert year after year after year, and you're going to be disappointed. I'm not saying he's a bad player at all. I'm just saying that he's not the best defensive player in the NBA. There was no sign of that during the playoffs. No sign of that. That's the truth. Here's another truth. I haven't seen any of the post-game press conference, but I guarantee you that Anthony Edwards is going to be smiling and grinning because he's immature. And again, I haven't seen the press conference yet, but YouTube or Google Minnesota Timberwolves press conference. And again, I haven't seen anything, but I guarantee even after a blowout loss like they had at home tonight, that should sting. That should hurt. There should be no grinning. There should be no laughing. All series long, whenever they hit some adversity, Anthony Edwards would always say, "We're gonna be all right, man. Are you gonna be all right now? Like you're done. Are you gonna be all right now? Like this should sting a little bit. This should hurt a little bit. And it's okay to show that during your press conferences. What are you trying to prove? What he's shown in the last few press conferences where they've gotten their asses kicked is a lot of grinning and smiling. You're going home tonight. There should be no grinning and smiling. I could be wrong, but we'll see. That's the truth that I feel like that's going to happen tonight in the press conference. Another truth, I think the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think they learned a great lesson this year. They felt really good after the Denver Nuggets series, which they should have. Felt fantastic about that, and they got humbled in the Dallas Mavericks series. And I think that this team can learn a lot. They could learn a lot. Sometimes you have to lose these type of games to become better. And I think the Minnesota Timberwolves, hopefully, can just take a lot in from this series. The coaching staff as well. Hopefully, they can learn from this. Doesn't mean, you can't make changes in terms of personnel and stuff like that. I just feel like the Minnesota Timberwolves were humble and they learned a great lesson. It's the truth. Luka and Kyrie taught them a lesson. Anthony Edwards wanted Kyrie. He couldn't handle Kyrie. Kyrie had 36 tonight. I believe he had 36. He may have had more. I lost count. He was scoring so much late. He and Luka had at least 38. At least 38. So I think the Minnesota Timberwolves learned a lesson for sure. Now the truth. Minnesota Timberwolves, everyone talks about Luka crying all the time. The Minnesota Timberwolves look for refs to bail them out all the time. Those of you who recorded the game, DVR'd the game, I don't know what you call it nowadays, but if you recorded the game, just in your free time, just go and look. Every time they drive to the basket, Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns are crying for fouls. Like they're looking for referees to bail them out. It must be so exhausting. It must be so mentally exhausting to play that way. Like you would think after a few times having referees in the playoffs, you would get to the point where you just know they're not going to call anything. And you got to hoop up. You got to lace them up and play and not care about the referees. But they just never seem to get it. They're constantly flailing their hands. I don't know how many times Karl Anthony Towns on drives and layups hit the floor. That dude hits the floor more than a breakdancer. He's always on the ground. He's a big human being, and he's always on the freaking ground. It's just unbelievable to me. Always crying and asking for fouls. Truth. Anthony Edwards midway through the third quarter, and again, this is truth. I'm not dogging Ant. Midway through the third quarter, Ant had 11 points. 11 points he had. He ended the night with 28. So for those of you that don't watch the game really close and you just look at stats, you think, well, Ant had a great game tonight. Once they got down by 30, I know what everybody's going to say. Well, they're down by 30. You got to let it loose. You got to let it loose and you got to play. That's the mentality that you should have been playing with the whole series. Ant and Karl Anthony Towns did a fantastic job padding their stats in the fourth quarter. That's the truth. That's not a hate take. It's the truth. Anthony Edwards was more aggressive from midway through the third quarter into the fourth quarter than I had seen him really all series. There was a sense of urgency in him. There was a sense of freedom in him. He hit 3 threes in a row. Did you see how quickly he was taking some of those shots? And you can't say, well, Dallas was playing a different defense. No, they weren't. They still were attacking him and double teaming him. Go watch the tape. There was just no pressure. You look up, you're down by 30, and there was just no pressure out there. So what do you do when there's no pressure? You get loosey-goosey, and you go out there and you start balling. And they were padding their stats. Anthony Edwards had 28 points tonight, but that 28 points was not impactful. Not impactful at all. It was just weird and funny to watch his aggressiveness. Karl Anthony Towns had 28 points tonight. 28 points were not impactful And I give credit to Karl Anthony Towns. He was aggressive throughout the game. But it's funny how Ant can look so passive in certain moments and in certain games. And then all of a sudden, once there's no pressure, man, he turns on the juice. I couldn't believe what I was watching midway through the third quarter. I mean, as it was as aggressive as he's looked this whole series. It was unbelievable. Last truth. Minnesota Timberwolves they are not a physical basketball team. For those of you that watch basketball, like to watch film, go back and watch all of the 50-50 balls. I don't know if I could find a stat, but I would love to see how many 50-50 balls Dallas won and how many 50-50 balls the Minnesota Timberwolves won. I would love to see, I don't have it in front of me, but I would love to see the Dallas Mavericks offensive rebounding chart. How many second chances they got. That's a lack of physicals. And you're one of the biggest teams in the league. You have built a foundation on size and length. And it did you no good. Lively for the Dallas Mavericks didn't miss a shot the whole series. 16 for 16 he was. Dunk City. How many dunks did the Dallas Mavericks get at the basket in the realm where we're supposed to have our defensive player of the year? We are not a physical basketball team. And those are truths. I just wanted to throw out there some truths about the Minnesota Timberwolves. You can like them or not like them, but they're truths. You can't watch the 3 series that we had and say that anything that I said tonight was off base or not accurate. Go back and watch the games. This is just my basketball mind working. This is the truth about the Minnesota Timberwolves. So you can either take these truths and go back to the drawing board and start to revamp your team a little bit, fill some holes, and maybe we may get over the hump next year. Or you could close your eyes and close your ears to what the truth really is and run this thing back with the same roster next year. But if you do that, if you close your eyes and close your ears to the truth, you will be sitting here at the same time next year, long-faced. Because it's inevitable. This has been Unconventional Playbook. Again, great season by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Just came up a little bit short. I love this team, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm so glad that I'm not compromised by relationships with anybody in the organization or in the media. We just tell it like it is on the UP. This has been Unconventional Playbook. We'll see you next time. Great job, Timberwolves. Starting to get ready for the Minnesota Vikings and their training camp. We will definitely get you updated on what's been going on there. Again, fantastic job. I love you, UP Nation. Like and subscribe. Keep growing this thing. We're almost to 4,000 subscribers. I'll see you when I see you.
Powered by Riverside.